Next, we go on to the evaluation of ptosis by Dr. Arnab Biswas. He is a leading oculoplastic and orbital surgeon from Kolkata. After his MBBS and MS, he has also taken an FRCS from Glasgow and a fellowship in oculoplasty and orbit from France. He has a unique collection of more than 50,000 photographs of rare and interesting cases. He has authored 2 books, Atlas of Oculoplasty and Orbital Surgery, and a book on ptosis surgery, which is suggested as reading clinical material by ICO. Dr. Arnab.
Thank you, sir, for this lovely introduction. After this enthusiastic quiz, I also participated in the quiz and I really enjoyed it. Thank you, sir. Just relax, sit back. What I'm going to say is everything is written in the books, and I didn't expect a huge audience like this. I had brought in around 20 leaflets, handouts of what I'm going to present to you. Just note down my email address. If you need a copy of that PDF format of the clinical evaluation, I can send it to you. Just send it me a request. I have 20 sheets, handouts. What I would suggest is from each institute, share it within yourselves. Take a copy and print it out within yourselves. I'll just pass on the evaluation, not the evaluation, the handouts. One for each institute, and you can, anybody who doesn't get it, just write down the mail address. Relax, sit back. Everything is written in the clinical text books that we all have. What I want to share with you is your practical experience that you need to undergo in evaluating a case of ptosis that comes to your clinic, your OPD, or during an examination. Now, what I wanted to highlight is you need to clinch a diagnosis as soon as you see the patient. So, the first impression is very important when you evaluate a ptosis patient. Why I want to say is, as soon as a patient is shown to you in your examination, or a patient enters into a room, you should be able to reduce your differential diagnosis into 1 or 2, 3 aspects, not move around what it could be. It is a congenital, it is a myopathy, or any nerve palsy. Now, the first impression is important is because the age of the presentation of the patient. We will deal with the common ptosis patients that come to our clinic or OPD. Now, age is important because if you have a child of say 3 to 5 years or say 8 to 10 years, your probable diagnosis is as soon as he enters, this should be in your mind. Is he not a case of congenital ptosis that is being shown to me for evaluation? So that is the thing that should clinch into your mind and not move around in your mind that these things are the probabilities. If a patient presents at around middle age, say around 18 to 20 years, probably good looking, having a mild ptosis, probably he or she is having that ptosis, drooping of the lid, since his or her childhood. But because of rejections in the marriage proposals, her parents have brought into your clinic, or his, rather, even male are coming right now. Now, if you have an old person presenting to you, probably it is an acquired variety of ptosis, and you have 2, 3 things in mind. Could it be a myopathy? Could it be an aponeurotic ptosis? Or is it a nerve palsy? So the age is very important. Look at the age of the patient. You have reduced your differential diagnosis. The second important impression that will get into your head when you examine a patient is the face of the patient. Why I wanted to highlight about the face is, if you have a person like this who has ptosis, but look at the pupil, the eyeball, it's down and out. So entering young boy, but ptosis with an eyeball situated down and out. So what could it be the diagnosis? Right. So these two things have clinched your diagnosis. The other things, the MRD1, the liver traction, those are only for showing it to your examiner, or what surgery you want to do, plan, that is where you want to do those all calculations, which I'll come to later on. It's only for academic interest that you do it. You have clinched your diagnosis there. Now, if you have a faces like this, what findings do you have here? Can I have a pointer, please? You can see furrows in the forehead, bilateral ptosis. Which one? Yeah. Bilateral ptosis and masked faces. You haven't yet done any clinical evaluation. So what could be your differential diagnosis here? Yes, so it could be a myasthenia, or it could be some type of myopathy that is present to you. So you have reduced it to 2 diagnoses. You hardly need any further examination to do it. 1 or 2 tests that you need to do it. So these 2 things, when a patient enters, clinches your diagnosis. Now, once you have a rough idea of what the case is, next comes the important aspect of history taking. Not drug history, not this thing, but one important thing that gives you is how long. If it's been there since childhood, but presenting at an old age or middle age, it's probably a congenital ptosis. But if it is recent onset, you would think of ocular neurological causes or a myopathy, something fluctuating type of ptosis. Now, why I wanted to show you this lady's photograph is this young lady presented with a history of drooping of this right-sided ptosis. She was complaining that it has been there for only 1 or 2 years. Now, you are really in a dicey situation. How could it be? I'm not able to correlate. What is the cause? Just ask for her old photographs. Now, look at her old photographs. This is her young age. With the help of mascara, her family, parents has been trying to mask her ptosis. And this was a marriage photograph that they had given out. Similarly, a ptosis is there. Probably a head tilt is masking that ptosis. So it's not a fresh onset ptosis, but asking for a little bit of information from that patient's party or patient's relatives will clinch your diagnosis. Probably it's a congenital ptosis that you are seeing. And sometimes the history may be misleading. Now, the second important finding question that will give a clue is, if it is, suppose this lady had presented a sudden onset, say 2 years, 1 year or 2 years old history. Now ask for fluctuation. What do you mean by fluctuation? Is it been there in the morning, evening, afternoon, or different times of the week? There is alteration in the drooping of the lids. Now how do you know it? Ask them to take photographs at different times of the day and bring back those photographs back to you. Now, look at this child. In spite of being a child, his parents had said that he had a ptosis in one eye. And we were really in a difficult situation. What was it? Sometimes, now we ask them to go back and come back after a month or so. And you can see at different times of the day, his parents had taken photographs. Sometimes ptosis is here, sometimes it's not there. So your diagnosis, what is the diagnosis? Fluctuating ptosis, myasthenia. So even in younger patients, it's the photograph that gives you clue to the myasthenia gravis. Now let's go to, so you have seen the patient, taken a few important histories. Other histories are there in the manuals, drug history, history of trauma. Those are usually insignificant, but suppose you have a history of trauma is significant in case of aponeurotic ptosis due to a blunt trauma, due to levator disinsertion. Now let us go into a little bit of examination part. Now, these are basically to reconfirm what you are thinking in your mind. Basically, this is first important thing is what surgery you are going to plan. So you have somehow reached a diagnosis, or you are in a doubt of one or two differential diagnoses. And here comes the role of examination. Now, why are you doing this examination? This lady has a mild ptosis. This is just covering the pupillary axis. This is a moderate ptosis. And the pupillary axis is totally covered. This is a marked ptosis. So what is important in this is assessing the amount of ptosis is one, is when do you plan the surgery? Why? Because in this young child, there's a high chance of amblyopia developing. So early intervention is required because of the amount of ptosis covering the pupillary margin. And in this, here, and in this, it's just covering. If you can assess the visual axis, you can delay a little bit. Probably when the boy becomes more cooperative, you can plan ptosis surgery. And of course, these patients will not present to you unless they have been rejected or for marriage proposals or something like that. So really, these are not cosmetic related. These are only cosmetic related issues that patient will present to you. Now, the second important thing is the levator function. Same thing that I was telling about. What surgery you are going to plan is where you need to assess for the levator function. I'll just go into the levator function. How do you measure it? That is the basic thing. If you can show the camera, focus it to my face, I'll just able to show it to you, the photographs. The camera person over there. Basically, the measurement is from down gaze of the lids to the up gaze of the lids. The lid lash line, you should keep it put your forehead here, hand in your forehead, so that you need to suppress the levator action. See over here, like this, you pull down the frontalis so that the frontalis doesn't work. Now you use a scale, whatever scale you have. Probably a transparent scale is very helpful. Put it in front of your eyes, something like this, and put the 0 mark on the scale on the down gaze. Ask the person to look down and put the 0 mark over here. Now, with this fixed firmly, ask the person to look up. Now, from 0 to the scale that you have, here suppose it's 15 millimeters from the 0. So, at the extreme up gaze, you measure the lash line on the scale. And you should look straight and not obliquely or from this side. Probably with one eye closed, something as you do in a field test. Something like what you do in a field test, absolutely in front of that person. From extreme down gaze, putting a finger on your frontalis and ask the patient to look up gaze. So the difference between the 0 and this thing gives you the levator function. You can go into the monitor. Now, this gentleman, if you look here, has very minimal levator function. It's hardly moving from 0 to 5 millimeters from extreme down gaze to up gaze. See, this is the down gaze. What you will look is this side, it's up, and here hardly has 5 millimeter or less amount of levator function. So what is given a standard is, if it is less than 5 millimeters, it's poor. 5 to 10 millimeters is moderate, and above 15 millimeters is good, mild, moderate, and good levator function. If it's 15 millimeters or more, the levator function is taken as good. Why? Because all this is because what surgery you are going to plan. If it is less than 5 millimeters, levator resection is not going to work. You need to do a sling operation in that type of situations. But if it is between 5 to 15 millimeters, levator resection is definitely an option that you can think of. So this is for clinical evaluation. And another important aspect where you use the levator measurements is cases of aponeurotic ptosis, which I'll come to you a little later. And second important examination is if you look at this person on primary gaze and on down gaze. This gentleman has ptosis in this eye, but on down gaze, he has lid lag. Now, what does this mean? It is a very classical sign that is present in what type of ptosis? Congenital ptosis. And why does it happen? Yes, absolutely right. So, this is a sign, just a down gaze, the lid is not going down as it is probably your diagnosis is there. It's a congenital ptosis. So, these are small tips that give you a clue into what type of ptosis. This is examination is reconfirming what you have thought in your mind. That is the basic aim of this. Now, there are some special examinations that you need to do. One is the superior lid crease. Now, why does the lid crease occur? It's because of the levator attachment, some fibers getting attached to the skin, and some fibers get attached to the tarsal plate. So, this attachment of the levator to the skin gives rise to the lid crease. In congenital ptosis, the lid crease is usually absent. While in cases of acquired ptosis, this type of ptosis, what do you call it? The lid crease is, superior lid crease is grossly elevated upwards. Look at this. This lid crease is somewhere here, while the lid crease is deep in the socket or somewhere here. So what is this diagnosis? Aponeurotic ptosis. Now, why has it taken place? See, there are two theories to it. One is the skin attachment is persisting, but some fibers, as I was telling you, is attached to the tarsal plate, anterior aspect of the tarsal plate. Due to aging, this becomes stretched, so that it becomes stretched, and as a result, because of the stretching, the skin crease is lax and it goes upwards. Or if in cases of trauma, there is a disinsertion from the tarsal plate, the attachment of the levator. So that is why the pull from the levator tarsal plate goes and the superior lid crease is elevated. So here, the examination of the lid crease with a good levator action, the surgery indicated would be what? Reattachment of the levator aponeurosis to the tarsal plate. So this is a different surgery that you are going to do by measuring good levator action, old age, superior lid crease elevated. So it's probably an aponeurotic ptosis or senile ptosis that we all call. And here, reattachment of the tarsal plate with the levator will give you the surgical results. Now, ocular movements, as I was discussing previously, this was a classical case of third nerve palsy. Especially in myopathies that we had a differential diagnosis of, where the eye movements are grossly restricted in chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia type of condition. You need to measure the ocular movements to reconfirm the diagnosis of whether it's an ocular myopathy or not. If it is restricted, you would say it as a case of ocular myopathy. Let the examiner ask you what are the differential diagnoses. Then you have some questions within yourself. It could be a myasthenia gravis, or it could be a chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia. Now, how do you differentiate those? You would have questions in your pocket to answer. So, don't give out all your answer as a whole. Keep something what you have in your pocket. The next important thing is the Bell's phenomenon. Now, I have shown you two photographs. One is the top, one is the down. Now, how do you measure the Bell's phenomenon? Can I have the photo, this thing towards my eyes? Now, there are two methods. Either you ask the patient to close his or her eyes and try to lift the eyelids up. So the patient is closing, not tightly, relaxedly he is closing his eyes, and you ask him to, and you just lift his eyes up. What are you looking at? You should be able to see the sclera, and the eyeball is upward and outwards. This is one method. Patient is closed his eyes, and you are forcefully trying to open it. And the second method of examining the Bell's phenomenon is how the patient is open, the eyes are open, and you ask the patient to close his or her eyes. Now, what are you looking at? You are looking at the movement of the eyeball that is going upwards and outwards. Why is it important? Yes. So if Bell's phenomenon is there, you are going to operate, you will think of operating, but in case like this, see, it's drooping, masked faces, ocular movements grossly restricted, and examining, trying to force, you can put it on the monitor. There's hardly any Bell's phenomenon. So these are situations where you will not advise surgery, you will try to think of some conservative methods, like what? Somebody said cross spectacles, right? You can try out. Surgery is a little, why is it contraindicated? Because exposure keratopathy. So these are patients, it's difficult to manage. You need to go in for cross spectacles. You need to go in for conservative, and those are things that can be discussed later on in different other topics, the management of ptosis part. So superior lid crease, ocular movements, and Bell's phenomenon. Three important issues that will clinch your diagnosis. Now, two or three special observations that you need to know. Just while the patient walks in, ask him to open his mouth or move it sideways, so that you don't miss out on Marcus-Gunn jaw-wing phenomenon. These are difficult situations to manage. How do you manage it is still debatable. Whether you should go in for surgery, whether you should not, depends on the amount of Marcus-Gunn, on the primary position, whether the pupillary axis is clear, whether the patient doesn't have amblyopia, or patients are relatively happy with the this thing. Marcus-Gunn really not concerned the patient's relatives. Then you can wait, because just disinserting the levator from the tarsal plate and doing a frontal sling in one eye would definitely give you benefit in that eye, but on down gaze what will happen? There would be lid lag on down gaze, because you have used a frontal sling in one eye, disinsertion of the levator and doing a frontal sling in the affected eye. Now, trying to motivate and do a frontal sling in this other eye, better eye, is difficult to convince. So these are options that you can talk, discuss, let the patient go back, return back after 6 months, let them decide what you want. So special observation is just a little, give them a toffee, give them a Cadbury, and see the Marcus-Gunn jaw-wing phenomenon. And second interesting observation, that is blepharophimosis syndrome. What are the three features? Telecanthus. Absolutely right. Telecanthus, ptosis, epicanthus inversus. So these are difficult situations that need to be managed, and probably single step surgery doesn't give good results. Maybe 2 steps or 3 steps surgeries do give some benefits. So these are observations, family history, isolated. These are things that you need to do. And if you are thinking of myopathies, as I was telling you, there is a little bit of fluctuation. You're not sure whether it's progressive ophthalmoplegia or whether it's myasthenia gravis. A little bit of ice, get a little bit of ice, put it on the affected eye, the ptosis can go. So these are extra additional special observations, special tests, special tips that will help you in your diagnosis. It's there in the leaflet that I've given you. This is a clinical evaluation sheet that if you can have it with you, or just note it down before, as soon as you get a case of ptosis, the history, the points, and just fill it up on the other side. That would impress your examiner, definitely. Now, before I end, I'll just show you a few interesting patients that I could gather and want your feedback on what the clinical diagnosis or any other evaluation that you would love to do to end this presentation of mine. A boy presented like this. What could it be? He has a head posture, has developed, and a ptosis has developed. So it's been there for quite long. So So what do you need to do? Its pupillary axis is covered. There is a head tilt. What do you so you have reached a diagnosis by just looking at the patient. Now need to counsel that get in early surgery to prevent further complications. So what is it? It's a congenital ptosis with head posture. Okay, clean cut case. Young female, a male with ptosis. Should you do surgery or not? Or what is it? What information would you want from this? Young female, around 20 years, has come to you. What questions would you ask the patient? How long? Fluctuation. Yeah, somebody was telling? And so you would advise a surgery right now in this around 20 years of age if there is no fluctuation, or you do an ice pack test to rule out myasthenia. That is unlikely at this type of situation. You would have some other restriction of ocular myopathies or restriction of ocular movements and all those, masked faces on all those things. Significant ptosis, lift the lids. What's the diagnosis? These two are the same patient. The eyeball is outwards. So, and there is complete ptosis. So probably history of head injury. So it's a third nerve palsy that has taken place. Just lifting of the lids clinches your diagnosis. Somebody was telling, what could it be? Yeah, somebody was telling why dermatochalasis patient has facial palsy, or facial palsy. Now, this looks like a drooping of the lids, but basically because of the facial palsy, the orbicularis muscle has become lax, and basically patient doesn't have ptosis as such. It's dermatochalasis, as somebody was telling about, lifting the lids, the skin, the lid is at the normal position. So it's not a case of ptosis, it's a pseudotosis that is there. And same history, two family brothers having a similar feature. What could it be? You look at the face, it's masked, ocular movements grossly restricted, similar in the family. So what could it be? It's an restricted ocular movements. Myasthenia is usually not transmitted in similar in the family. Yes, absolutely right. So that is what you ask, if does somebody have the similar feature. So these are basic things that I wanted to share with you. We still have a little bit of time. If you have any questions, I'm free to answer. And hopefully this small presentation of mine would keep you motivated to at least clinch your diagnosis and help you in reaching a diagnosis in a case of ptosis. Thank you. Just the email that I had shown you, anybody requests a sheet of that, just write it down, send me an email. I would love to send you the PDF of this presentation in case you don't get a leaflet there.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Mic, please. Mic.
Sir, in congenital ptosis, what is the laterality, sir? Like usually we see the congenital ptosis bilaterally or like unilateral. What is the percentage, sir?
In my experience, I see most of them are unilateral. Around 60 to 70% would be unilateral patients, and a few of them are bilateral. That I see around 30% patients of congenital ptosis I see bilateral, but most of them are unilateral. I see. What I wanted to highlight is the Marcus-Gunn jaw wing. Sometimes I used to miss out on the Marcus-Gunn jaw wing because I didn't examine it before. But definitely, unilateral congenital ptosis is more common than bilateral, and you definitely see some on and off Marcus-Gunn jaw wing associated with it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It was a nice lecture. We enjoyed it. Thanks. So we'll break for tea and come back at 3:45.